Welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. The shuttle doors hissed open, releasing a breath of humid, spore-laden air into the cabin. Cadets from across the Galactic Coalition emerged, blinking against the harsh orange glow of Tavaka 3's jungle moon. The atmosphere shimmered, thick with heat and particles of glowing pollen. To most of the alien trainees, this world presented a beautiful yet perilous challenge, a test of both survival and keen intellect. For Nick Vinn, the sole human in this cohort, it evoked the pungent, alive scent of an Earth greenhouse just before a summer storm. He stepped onto a moss-laden platform, his boots sinking slightly into the yielding ground. Around him, others activated hoverpads and drone kits, some already unfurling weather canopies and energy shields. Nick, however, made no move for his tech pack. Instead, he knelt, pressing 2 fingers into the soil. It was damp, layered, recently disturbed. He rubbed the dirt between his thumb and forefinger, noting its rich, clay-like consistency, its subtle alkalinity. As he lifted it to his nose, a passing Xeon cadet recoiled, gagging. The tall, spindly fungal species with its porous skin gave Nick a wide berth. He paid them no mind. The exam was deceptively simple. Endure 5 cycles in the jungle, unaided. No orbital support, no weapons beyond what they could carry. The instructors had designated a safe zone, but even that held a hidden danger. Tavaka 3 boasted one of the highest biodiversity indexes in explored Coalition space, a world where flora moved, fauna mimicked sound, and the very air could induce a deadly slumber if one rested in the wrong glade. While most cadets sought open clearings, offering visibility, stable footing, and clear paths for drone flight, Nick did the opposite. He ventured deeper into the dense canopy, where gnarled roots twisted overhead like ancient, petrified serpents, and vines swayed with an unnerving, sentient grace. He moved with deliberate silence, listening not for animals, but for their conspicuous absence. That was always the telltale sign. If even the predators shunned a location, something far more formidable lurked within. Approximately 50 meters into the tree line, he discovered it, a hollow depression shaped like a bee and naturally shielded by the thick, arching roots of 3 surrounding trees. It lay lower than the surrounding terrain, a potential concern for flooding. Yet Nick observed a faint, dry ring of hardened mud along its perimeter, suggesting it had once held water, but now drained efficiently. More significantly, it was encircled by peculiar, fist-sized, cone-shaped mounds, arranged with no discernible pattern. He knelt by one and carefully split it open with his knife. Inside, a viscous amber substance slowly dripped out, and a fleeting glimpse of translucent wings vanished into the trees. Nick tensed. He recalled reading about the churflies in older logs, a species of acidic, winged swarm insects drawn to heat signatures and movement, known to dissolve the protective carapaces of even armored creatures. Most cadets had dismissed this threat, noting that churflies hadn't been sighted in this sector for 2 rotations. But Nick knew better. He recognized the subtle shift in the forest's demeanor. The trees were eerily still. No hums, no chirps, no scurrying rodents, only a profound silence, as if the jungle itself held its breath. He rose, scanning the high canopy, and noticed faint scores etched into the bark of several nearby trees. Old claw marks, likely from animals fleeing in a desperate haste. This confirmed his suspicion. The swarm hadn't arrived yet, but it would, undoubtedly soon. Taking a deep breath, he set down his gear. While other cadets assembled shelters from flexible alloy panels and deployed temperature-controlled tents, Nick began to dig. He used a collapsible spade initially, but after the first hour, he switched to a flat piece of bark, ingeniously shaped like a shovel, and continued in rhythmic, circling motions, creating a shallow trench around the depression. As he worked, he gathered fibrous leaves, charred wood, and bitter-smelling roots that oozed a dark, viscous resin when cut. He pounded the roots with stones, then blended the resulting pulp with the damp soil from his trench. Periodically, he paused to chew on raw bark, not for sustenance, but to steady his frayed nerves. The jungle seemed to thrum with an expectant energy. Occasionally, a drone whizzed overhead, one of the surveillance units tracking the cadets' progress. Nick didn't look up. He knew they were observing the others, those meticulously constructing textbook shelters and adhering to Coalition protocol. His own efforts deviated sharply from the expected models. By sunset, his camp bore no resemblance to any other. Instead of a raised dome or a floating cocoon, Nick had fashioned a dugout enclosure, lined with damp leaves and topped with a vine-stitched canopy, reinforced with sticky tree sap. The trench surrounding him shimmered in the twilight, now filled with water and ash he had gathered from a nearby burnt stump. The acrid aroma of the crushed root paste lingered in the air. It was crude, unsightly, and utterly contrary to coalition standards. But Nick was not concerned with appearances. His primal understanding, honed by arduous earthly immersion, guided him, months in the Amazon, daring deep into uncharted Congo territories, poring over ancient survival lore. These shaped his belief. Old perils merely wear new guises. The crux lies in foresight versus reaction. As twilight descended, Nick hunkered by his barely there fire, its meager glow shielding his heat signature while offering just enough light to see his hands. The jungle fell into an unnatural hush. The wind died. Even the faint insectoid clicks vanished. In this profound silence, Nick knew his path was true. He settled back, drawing a shroud of desiccated foliage over himself, muffling his scent and form. His eyes closed, not for sleep, but for vigil. The true test had commenced. The primordial, uncaring jungle prepared its crucible, and Nick, the solitary human amidst alien recruits, had heeded its subtle warnings. The night on Tavaka 3 didn't descend. It pressed down, thickening the air, smothering all sound, constricting the jungle like a tightening vice. Nick lay concealed beneath his leafy blanket, his breaths measured, his eyes piercing the encroaching darkness. He catalogued the moments between a fading branch rustle and the first subtle alien tremor in the atmosphere. The quiet was not peace. It was a charged anticipation, as if the very ecosystem held its breath for what was to come. His grip tightened on the edge of his improvised shelter. The air grew heavy with an unnatural warmth, the sun long since surrendered to the horizon. A cloying humidity rose from the earth, carrying the acrid scent of decay and something sharper, an acidic sting that pricked the inside of his nostrils. His instincts flared. It had begun. A low hum, initially imperceptible like a distant engine, began to resonate. It swelled, deepening, a myriad of tiny wings beating in dissonant harmony, building toward an overwhelming crescendo. Nick exhaled softly, pressing himself lower, tucking his limbs close, his scent masked by the carefully applied paste. The cheer flies were arriving. A piercing shriek ripped through the jungle, not from the swarm, but from one of the cadets. A sharp, brief cry of agony, followed by a surge of panicked fear broadcast across their comms. Nick remained motionless, his anticipation confirmed. The alien encampments, too exposed, too pristine, too well illuminated, had become prime targets, a sacrificial feast for the incoming swarm. The buzzing now throbbed in the air like static electricity, resonating in Nick's very bones. The first wave washed over his position like a spectral fog, catching the faint moonlight, reflecting an unsettling shimmer of emerald and amethyst. From his vantage point, Nick watched the swarm engulf a camp to his left. The species was unclear, but its protective dome blazed as energy barriers flared. The cheerflies retaliated with savage intensity. Thousands latched onto the shield's surface, their caustic secretions instantly degrading the energy field. The shield sputtered, arced, and then died. Another scream, this one longer, twisting into a guttural howl that etched itself into Nick's mind. He closed his eyes, not in fear, but to block out the sound, to immerse himself in the rhythm of the unfolding chaos. He heard the whisper of wings grazing his trench's edge. The moat held. The water, thick with ash and root fibers, repelled them not through poison, but through sensory confusion. Drawn by heat and carbon dioxide, the insect's targeting was disrupted by the trench's masking effect. To the swarm, his location registered as nothing more than stagnant detritus. A crackle of static broke the calm. A Thorn cadet barked orders in her native tongue, a rapid staccato of clicks punctuated by gasping breaths, then silence. Nick deactivated his comm. It was a liability. Communication was a beacon, a trail for the swarm to follow. The next hour was a grueling test of endurance. The jungle pulsed with frantic activity. Distant energy weapon fire crackled intermittently short bursts, likely from handheld plasma projectors, utterly ineffective against sheer numbers. Cheerflies were indifferent to pain. They craved saturation. More heat, more movement, meant more attack. Those who fought back only advertised their presence. A shadow moved at the trench's edge, too large for a fly. Nick saw the broken form of a Zevan, dragging himself through the muck, his body smeared with goo from a destroyed hive. The cadet's breaths were ragged gasps. His porous skin was torn and raw, where stinging flies had burned through his outer layer. He stumbled onward, collapsing just short of Nick's protective trench. For a heartbeat, Nick faltered. The Zevan's eyes were unfocused, darting wildly, his limbs spasming uncontrollably. Nick knew that venturing out to pull him in meant risking his own safety. A single wrong move could draw the swarm's fury. But then the Zevan emitted a choked, gurgling cry, a sound that barely resembled a human voice. Nick cursed under his breath, reaching for a long branch nearby. He stretched it across the gap, snagging the cadet's arm, and slowly, carefully, dragged the lifeless weight forward until the Zevan's inert body slumped within the inner ring. Nick shielded the cadet with salvaged leaves, then splashed him with trench water, a desperate attempt to neutralize the pheromones clinging to his skin. The Zevan offered no thanks, barely stirred, but Nick didn't require thanks. He simply craved quiet. Hours bled into one another. Fleeting glimpses of other figures flickered through the trees, fleeting shapes running, falling, vanishing. Some reached the outer vines, most didn't. The relentless chirping of the flies persisted. They moved as a single, terrifying entity, fragmenting into smaller groups, returning to their nest, then surging back in suffocating waves. Nick's eyelids felt heavy only once. A slow blink nearly sealed his fate, but a tremor through the earth jolted him back to alertness. A swarm node had landed close by, a central cluster of the hive encircled by hundreds of drones. He counted 5 agonizing minutes until it stirred, rising with a mechanical hum as the swarm shifted to a distant clearing. Finally, as the first faint blush of dawn streaked the horizon, the swarm began to withdraw. It wasn't a rout, but a deliberate migration, a movement towards other sources of sustenance. The buzzing receded, the oppressive vibration lifted from his skull, and the jungle slowly exhaled. Nick waited until the full glare of morning bathed the trees before he dared to move. The Zevan beside him moaned softly, alive, but barely conscious. Nick scanned the cadet's vitals with a wrist-mounted reader. Blood pressure critically low, severe dehydration, but stable for the moment. He pushed himself up, his gaze sweeping over the devastation beyond his refuge. The jungle bore the scars of their struggle-collapsed shelters, splintered trees, scorched earth where fire had been a futile defense. Tattered fragments of armor and fabric clung to branches like relics of a forgotten age. A drone passed overhead again, this time moving slower, its lens locked directly onto his position. It hovered for a long minute, zooming in on the intact perimeter, the functional trench, and the 2 figures resting in the heart of a ravaged landscape. Nick raised a single hand, not in surrender, but in quiet acknowledgement. He had endured the jungle's fury, not with advanced weaponry or impenetrable shields, but with grit, patience, and the very earth beneath him. He turned his attention back to the Zevan cadet. The fungal creature was barely breathing, but Nick knew he would survive if the instructors arrived in time, and if not, at least he wouldn't face the end alone in the desolate expanse. That was all that mattered. The jungle had fallen silent once more, but this time the stillness was genuine. Not a prelude to attack, but a soft sigh of relief. The trial wasn't over. Not yet. But the worst had undoubtedly passed. Now, the morning mist crept low through the trees, diffusing the sunlight into faint shafts that pierced the tangled branches and drooping vines. A heavy moisture permeated everything, the leaves, the bark, the very air, as if the jungle itself was sweating after a fierce illness. Nick knelt near the edge of his trench, his fingers idly trailing through the murky water. The ash had settled into delicate gray ribbons, and clumps of root pulp near the corners formed a thick, viscous layer that still released the sharp, earthy aroma he had relied on to conceal his presence. The Zevan cadet had remained silent, but his shallow breaths had deepened some time before sunrise. Nick had already tended to 2 of the larger acid burns on his porous arm, using moss soaked in antiseptic sap, and had wrapped the lower limbs with strips torn from his own sleeping gear. He harbored no illusions about the cadet's comfort. Zeon physiology was poorly understood, even by medical experts, but stabilizing him was the only humane course of action. By mid-morning, the instructors appeared. Not on foot, of course. Coalition officials never ventured directly into hazardous territory unless protocol absolutely mandated it. Instead, 3 hoverpods descended from the dense canopy, disturbing clouds of insects as they released a fine mist of decontamination spray onto the ground. Nick stood stoically as one of the pods extended automated appendages, gently lifting the injured Zevan. Zeon pulled him toward the containment shell, while a second pod scanned the perimeter of Nick's trench, its sensors emitting quiet hums and flickers of light. The third remained still, its camera fixed on Nick's face, studying him with an intensity no alien swarm had ever matched. He remained silent until a drone voice cut through the static. "State the nature of this structure." Nick straightened, his posture firm. "Defensive barrier," he stated. "Biological deterrent, a mixture of moisture and ash, root resin for scent masking, dug overnight." A brief pause followed. Source of knowledge for design? Field observation, pre-technological Earth tactics, behavior-based defense. The drone emitted a low tone, perhaps approval, and then drifted away toward the ruined camps. Nick turned, beginning to reassemble his canopy, intending to stay put until instructed otherwise. Later that afternoon, another cadet emerged from the jungle's edge. Tall and pale-skinned, her crystalline armor was cracked and caked in yellow mud. She belonged to the thorn species, known for their intellect and keen senses, moving with the stiff elegance of one taught from birth to maintain composure. Approaching slowly, arms raised in a gesture of peace, she found Nick's guard still up. He nodded once, gesturing towards a dry spot within the trench. She stepped over the barrier carefully, inspecting the water. "I am Silene," she announced, her voice soft yet firm. "You are Nick Vin." "Yes," he confirmed with another nod. "Your perimeter kept the swarm away." "That's what it was built to do." She knelt beside him, her movements precise and controlled. "I had a shield. It lasted 2 minutes. Then my second shelter fell. After that I ran. I saw yours still standing." She spoke without shame, her tone purely analytical. "You dug a trench?" Nick pointed to the edges. "Surrounding scent barrier, saturated ash, swamp water base, resin from bitter root clusters 2 kilometers east." "You improvised this overnight?" "Yes." She studied him, then surveyed the camp. "The others will come." They saw the drone footage. Nick understood. Survival had shifted from an individual challenge to a political one. Someone had succeeded, demanding explanations, examinations, perhaps even accusations. By dusk, 3 more cadets arrived, 2 injured, 1 limping, all looking hollow-eyed. They clustered just outside the trench, whispering in harsh syllables and fragmented dialects. One was clearly Aod, feathered and high-shouldered with twitching claws. The other 2 were unidentifiable beneath mud and burned equipment. Silene stood as they hesitated. "This perimeter saved me. It may save you." One scoffed. "It's mud and garbage." She didn't flinch. "It's what worked." Eventually, one cadet stepped forward, mimicked Nick's earlier motion, knelt, and crossed the trench. The others followed. Nick offered no help, nor did he resist. His camp now held 5 cadets, 2 conscious, 3 resting, 1 near death. Tension hung heavy between them. That night, as the jungle cooled, Silene returned to the trench's edge. "You should name it," she said without turning. "Name what?" "This," she gestured around the perimeter. "The method, the trench, the mixture. It will be studied. It may be repeated. You should name it before others do." Nick considered this. He hadn't sought fame, nor did he wish to be a subject of study. But the swarm had confirmed his belief. Survival depended not on the best tools, but on seeing what others missed, on listening. "I'll think about it," he replied quietly. The next morning brought more drones, more questions. Coalition scientists watched from orbit, scrutinizing Nick's design. A module landed nearby, containing sterile containers and a request for samples of his ash mixture. He provided them freely, letting them test, dissect, and replicate. By the 5th sunrise, the jungle around the trench was mostly silent, save for the quiet murmur of injured cadets healing within the mud-lined shelter, a testament to instinct and memory. Nick sat against the root wall, sharpening a piece of bark, the repetitive motion keeping his mind focused. Silene sat beside him, watching the jungle through narrow slits in the canopy. "When you saw the mounds," she asked, "what told you they were nests?" "The silence," Nick replied. "Everything else avoided them." She tilted her head, crystalline strands catching the light. Ching light. "You hear what others missed?" "Yes," she whispered, head bobbing. Most seek the loudest sounds, ignoring the quiet. Nick remained silent, understanding dawning. The camp was a testament now, crafted not in words, but in ash and mud. Awareness, understanding that in a galaxy of technology, some answers were older than stars. As more cadets arrived, whispers of Nick's survival rippled through the camp. He felt no pride, only the knowledge of what was required, nothing more. The jungle seemed to breathe, tense, awaiting a clash. The silence around the trench pulsed, waited with unseen eyes, not the jungle, but the survivors. By daybreak, the camp teemed with life. Cadets arrived, some wounded, others with recording drones. The trench, his haven, was now a focal point for attention. The first accusation came from a Vorax cadet, voice booming. "You knew!" he roared, finger accusing. "You let us walk into it!" Nick, calm, replied, "I suspected." "Suspected?" The Vorax stepped closer. "And no warning? Just your pit and a silent scream." Celine intervened, her form shimmering. Survival was the test, each for themselves. The Vorax snarled, choosing self-preservation. Nick met his gaze. "I chose to survive. Warnings would have brought the swarm faster." Silence fell. The truth, though uncomfortable, resonated. In survival, sound meant death. Fear was bait. Later, the instructors arrived. Commander Heth announced, "Protocol breach. Cadet Van faces inquiry." Nick stepped forward. "I'll explain." The data unfolded. Drone footage, thermal scans, Nick's trench untouched. He pulled a cadet to safety. "Why no warning?" Commander Heth asked. Nick answered steadily. "There was no time. Decisions based on instinct. My noise could have cost lives. Silence let me create something others could use." The Trellick instructor asked him to repeat his plans, step by step. Nick described his design: soil, roots, ash, water. He spoke plainly, with clarity, stating the cold facts. The pause hung heavy, the instructors exchanged glances, and the Trellick stepped back. Commander Heth addressed the group. The survival strategy demanded no sharing, yet exceptional methods, once proven effective, must be documented. Nick Van, your technique, though simple, was life-saving. You are cleared of any wrongdoing. This design will be studied for future training protocols. Whispers swept through the camp. Curiosity, irritation, grudging respect. The Vorax cadet said nothing, pride too wounded. Later, Nick sat near the now communal fire. The trench had been expanded. Cadets copied his barrier. Some even built small moats. It was spreading. Celine sat beside him. "It worked," she murmured. He agreed, but it wasn't just the trench. She didn't press him. The timing, the silence, the patience. The trench was only the physical defense. Real survival was restraint, doing less, not more. A difficult lesson in a galaxy consumed by innovation. Instructors returned, giving Nick a data rod. "Your design requires a name." He looked at the rod, then at the jungle. The trees swayed gently, the sky violet, stars emerging. "The Van Barrier," he finally said. The instructor nodded. The others continued their work, but Nick watched the jungle breathe. The camp no longer felt dangerous, but a message in mud, spoken in silence. He awoke before dawn. The sky was slate gray. Dew clung to the ash-lined moat. The fifth cycle of the exam had begun. Extraction was near. The camp had grown, now a memory of survival. He walked to the camp's edge, where younger cadets dug half-formed ridges. Rick, a young humanoid, looked up. "Deeper?" he asked. Nick examined the trench. "Burning resin tonight? Then widen it." Rick resumed digging. Nick returned to the central gathering ring. Celine was there, teaching cadets how to weave durable sleeping mats, her voice precise. Nick listened briefly, then moved on. The medic, collecting samples from the plants Nick had marked, offered a nod. Respect. By midday, a larger pod landed, carrying the final evaluation crew. Commander Heth emerged. Nick, uninterested in titles, began dismantling his shelter. The vines were untied. The leaves used to mask his heat were carefully collected. His gear was meticulously stowed. The trench, his sanctuary, remained untouched, not from neglect, but because it was no longer his alone. It had been codified, dissected, immortalized. That simple safeguard, born of primal instinct and earthy wisdom, now existed in countless recordings, analyses, and dossiers. Yet as he finished packing, he sensed a presence. Commander Heth materialized beside him, ever silent, stepping past the perimeter to stand by the charred remains of the fire pit. "Most cadets leave their shelters as they built them," the commander observed. "I came here to live, not build a monument," Nick countered quietly. Heth's gaze swept the area. "You've already done that." Nick exhaled, a sound that might have been suppressed laughter. He resumed untangling stubborn vines. The commander paused, then continued. Your design has been integrated into Coalition protocols. It's being added to the Academy's adaptive survival program. Simulation runs are already testing modifications. Nick looked up, surprised. So soon? News travels quickly when crude innovation saves lives. He nodded once, returning to his task. Commander Heth remained. After a silent moment, the commander inquired, What do you believe they'll remember? Nick hesitated. His eyes lingered on the waterlogged trench, its edges hardened by time. Around it, newer trenches, variations of his design, spoke volumes. They'll remember that technology isn't always the solution, he finally said. That listening to the forest can be more important than scanning it. That preparedness doesn't always require advanced technology. Heth grunted softly in agreement. A lesson long overdue. As the setting sun bathed the forest in golden light, the extraction signal pierced the air. A single chime echoed from above, and within moments, the first skimmers descended through the canopy. They hovered, sleek and silent, settling on clear patches of ground. One by one, cadets gathered their belongings and formed a line. Some clutched bits of bark, others carried soil samples or journals filled with sketches of their personal trench designs. The Venn barrier was more than just a name. It was a legacy. Nick was the last to finish. He paused at the edge of the clearing, listening to the forest. The jungle no longer whispered danger. It hummed with a strange tranquility, as if acknowledging what had been earned. Celine approached him just before he boarded the transport, holding out a slender, polished crystal with a symbol etched inside. What's this? He asked. A Thorn memory crystal, she replied. We record moments that reshape understanding. Yours reshaped mine. He took it in silence, closing his fingers around it carefully. Then he stepped into the skimmer and ascended, watching the camp disappear beneath the leaves, a smudge of ash and mud swallowed by the green. Months later, in a sterile training room on the orbiting Coalition Academy, young cadets would gather around a holographic projection. Vines would materialize around them. A trench would shimmer into existence. A voice, calm and measured, would narrate the method. They would call it the Venn barrier. They would learn it as procedure. But Nick would always remember it as the thing that kept him alive, and reminded everyone that even in a galaxy of wonders, survival sometimes meant knowing when to be still, when to listen, and when to dig.